Aloha, I'm Elena Hugh. Welcome to another edition of PTC TV, brought to you by PTC'14 Platinum sponsor Equinix. This is the fourth of 5 programs specially created for PTC'14, and the last that will air in room on Channel 35. If you missed any of the previous programs or want to see tomorrow's 5th program, you can watch them online after the conference at ptc.org.
Aloha, I'm Sharon Akama. I hope you have enjoyed the conference so far and that you have found the experience to be a valuable way to start your new year. We still have a series of very interesting keynotes and topical sessions today, and more opportunity to gain new insights for the year ahead. You are also invited to the PTC'14 closing lunch and awards ceremony. I look forward to seeing you there. Don't forget, all 5 episodes of PTC TV will be available on ptc.org early next week, so be sure to tune in. Aloha!
Mobile traffic has had some interesting impacts to the mobile ecosystem. First and foremost would be mobile network operators. For the longest time, mobile networks tended to be a single application network, and that was voice. This is very similar to the behavior we saw 14 years ago when public ISPs came together in our facilities in order to peer and localize the exchange of traffic with one another in order to make sure that the internet delivered a positive experience. We're now seeing the same thing from the mobile network operators. There's some interesting secondary effects to other members of the mobile ecosystem for very similar reasons. A good example would be social media platforms and advertising platforms that tend to co-locate next to one another in order to serve content as efficiently and quickly as possible. Another good example would be handset OEMs, who will tend to proxy things such as email and other types of popular content in order to make sure the end user has a positive experience.
Hi, I'm Gary Kim, and I'm working with PTC, and I'm here today with Priscilla Demission, who's Chief of Frequency Management with the National Telecommunications Commission of the Philippines. So,
yes,
Priscilla,
that's correct,
thank
Gary.
you for being with us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So, let me ask you, what do you think could be done to free up more spectrum in the Philippines for communications?
Oh, actually, a lot of our spectrum are tied up with the original grantees. So perhaps what we can do is to have a continuing inventory of the radio frequencies to find out if they are currently in use, and perhaps recall them so that they can be reassigned to other users. And another thing that we can do is to more or less reclassify the frequencies that had been given exclusive allocations to users. For example, frequencies that have been sub-allocated for government users. Some of them are not using them anymore. So perhaps you can have these frequencies be reallocated for the use of private corporations, private entities, or private individuals. Also, we can try adopting technologies that could allow sharing of frequencies. I refer to, Gary, for example, the frequencies operating in the 2.4 and the 5 gigahertz band. These are usually referred to as the unlicensed band or the frequency commons. But you see in the Philippines, it's not really 100% unlicensed, Gary. But nonetheless, it's one of those technologies that I really love because they don't take much of our brain work to do the assignment for them. So I really like those technologies. And another thing would be helping out the current assignees to move out, especially if we have plans to reallocate the bands that they are currently using. We had that before, Gary, when we reallocated our fixed allocations for the use of the cellular mobile services. So in order for them to move out of the ban, the government gave them some incentives. We asked the new users, the new assignees, to take care of them if they get transferred to another relocation band. So the new assignees would take care of them, move them out, and we as government, we identify the relocation bands for them to move in. So I think those are some of the procedures that we can do.
Always difficult.
Always difficult. There's nothing easy, really, Gary. There's nothing really very easy.
Yeah. Now, have you been looking at, I guess what we're calling now dynamic spectrum, the ability to share spectrum, so that you don't actually have to go through all of this process of removing people from the license so that other people can use it?
Yes, that's right, Gary. I think dynamic spectrum access is one of those emerging techniques or technologies that is being introduced. And yes, we certainly would welcome developments in those bands because my understanding from DSA is that the equipments will be able to detect the channels that are not in use and can be made available for them, and then they can just operate in these frequencies on non-interference basis, of course, Gary, non-interference basis. And well, when you say non-interference basis, is that if somebody complains because of your operation, then you will just have to stop.
And hopefully it's not a competitor.
Yeah, certainly hope it's not. But even then, if it's a competitor, we would always do some investigations if the complaint of interference is valid or just making tricks. Yeah, that's what it is.
Well, Priscilla, thank you very much for speaking to us. We appreciate your insight.
Oh, it's been my honor to be here, Gary. It's been a pleasure. And well, of course, for PTC, I wish you more power and more success for the coming years.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thanks for watching.
Would you like a quick and easy way to keep track of the conference program and schedule? Download the PTC mobile app and favorite the sessions you'd like to attend. Learn more about PTC'14 sponsors and find out where meeting suites are located. You can do all of this and more. Visit crowd.c/s/1BFQ on your mobile device, or search for PTC Conference in the App Store or Pacific Telecommunications Council in Google Play. PTC'14 is made possible in part by the generosity of the PTC'14 sponsors. Mahalo to PTC'14 Diamond sponsor, Tata Communications. Thank you for all of your support. We hope you enjoyed Tuesday's keynotes, executive insight roundtables, topical sessions, and the Tuesday evening reception sponsored by PTC'14 Diamond sponsor, Tata Communications. Join us on Wednesday for the last of the executive insight roundtables and keynotes. PTC also invites all full, network, and Wednesday-only registrants to attend the closing lunch and award ceremony.
Now more than ever, broadband is life. It's the modern heartbeat that connects our world. And like our own heartbeat, we take it for granted that it'll always be there, until the day it's not. In 2011, a 9.0 magnitude quake and tsunami struck Japan, resulting in multiple submarine cable faults that threatened telecommunications services throughout the region. Ciena's GeoMesh service provider networks never went down during one of the worst disasters in modern history. No other network can make that claim. Ciena didn't just get lucky. We simply demand more from our technology than any other network provider in the world. Too much is at stake for businesses to rely upon old technologies trying to catch up with today's broadband explosion. Ciena is different. We expected the inevitable and designed fiber optic networks that could handle it. The Ciena GeoMesh unifies terrestrial and submarine networks like never before. It's intelligent, self-aware, and self-healing. When submarine cables get cut or terrestrial links are damaged, the system automatically reroutes communications in milliseconds. So if Ciena's GeoMesh can keep connectivity working at the worst of times, just imagine how well it performs at the best of times. With demand for broadband increasing by 40% a year and submarine cables quickly approaching terabit carrying capacities, businesses need global networks they can trust to handle their skyrocketing challenges. Our streamlined network delivers faster speeds, reduced latency, and fewer points of connectivity to manage and worry about. It all adds up to improved performance, lower operating costs, and greater cooperation. It's no wonder that Ciena has become a dominant player in the submarine network market in just a few years. And when you consider that a submarine cable is severed once every 3 days, or that a terrestrial cable is damaged every 30 minutes, an intelligent, self-healing network is critical. However, the greatest threat isn't a natural or man-made disaster. It's becoming one of these guys, being left behind because demand outstripped performance. Broadband is life. Make sure you have the most innovative network, the smartest people, and the most advanced technology working for you. Ciena's GeoMesh. Land, sea, cloud. Networks unite.
Let's start today with a keynote panel on technology and policy.
So we're going to talk a little bit about technology and policy and the intersection of those. I'm lucky enough to have with me Robert Pepper from Cisco and Joseph Ziskin from IBM, and I'm sitting in the wrong chair, but we'll make this work.
Where do you want to sit?
Actually, if I can switch with you,
Sure.
great.
There we go.
All right. Anyway, each of them are going to give a short presentation sort of framing the technology developments that we're going to talk about, and then we'll look at some of the policy implications of those. Joe, do you want to start off?
First
And I should say, I let them get away with a few slides this year, but they had to promise to make them interesting, and if not, next year they get no slides. So.
Okay, so I want to just
an air horn to be able to go.
yeah. First comment was whoever's picture that was an improvement, I guess, but it wasn't me.
That was the first edit we made to your slides.
What?
That was the first edit we made
Yes.
to your slides.
So what I want to kind of talk about first is just kind of position kind of what's happening and what we see playing out in some major kind of, not so much just technology, but shifts in the market. And the point I want to make on this page is where we've come from, which everybody, we as an industry, ICT, love to talk about stacks. Everything is a stack. We go from the bottom up to the top. And that's the traditional way we've looked at the market. Even today, when we are moving into this new cloud world, we continue to talk about things in a stack, from the infrastructure as a service up through X as a service, whatever we want to look at it. But what we really see is more on the two side is people or customers, the market is moving towards much more of a view of capability. And it's all being driven by this move towards mobile, which I think we've heard a lot about this week, but putting the power into people's hands, but it's changing the relationship that companies have with employees, companies have with their customers, and it really does drive a very different opportunity for enterprises, for organizations to deliver value. The second aspect is there is this move at the higher levels to create as a service value propositions that are very different, to create flexibility in the market, speed in the market, and lots of disruption and innovation. And then finally, between the cloud and between mobile, we see a ton of data being created and a lot of value that can be realized from that perspective. And what it does is when we look at this, the ecosystems or various different players in the marketplace are emerging around ones that are focused around different aspects of the value chain. One is the traditional players, like IBM, always looked at sort of the customized market, where we come in and you talk to a customer and they explain what they need, and then you go through the process of trying to figure out how do you deliver the value to that customer. And it's the traditional large incumbents, complex systems, et cetera. When we move into kind of the world that we've seen around optimization, which was kind of a trend around business process outsourcing, where people looked at how do I get value out of something? How do I optimize the delivery of a given function or a different capability within my organization? And we see that kind of all play out. And then finally, we look at kind of from a more standard perspective, the cloud-based players, where it isn't about customizing to every different play or aspect of what an enterprise might want to do, but what it is really looking at much more of focus on volume, focus on simplification and driving towards scale to realize different benefit. As we see the market kind of playing out, and this is where we get into some policy questions, is we took a look at the market and said, what are the two extremes and where the market might go? One is a divergence scenario, which is kind of our view is we're pretty close to a divergence scenario, but not a complete one. But where that goes is not a lot of standards universally adopted or kind of pervasively. There is not a lot of peering. There's not a lot of portability between between providers. The cost of change is quite high, and what we see is a kind of a stagnation in the marketplace eventually. It will not be as big as it possibly could be. On the other side is a convergence scenario where standards are adopted, lots of peering, agreements, sort of like what the carrier world has moved to for cloud. Lots of views relative to the ability to move workloads to kind of drive towards an acceleration because of the perceived value of public cloud and the potential that it actually moves so far to being a utility and so important to economies that the regulators step in far more in the cloud world than they have looked at and kind of drive towards that. So when they think about it from a policy perspective, we kind of take a step back and look at, well, the two different types of policy, traditionally or historically, very protective oriented, where you're looking at things like food safety, water safety, electromagnetic radiation, types of things where the governments or policymakers are looking to step in and help protect the population or their constituents. Sarbanes-Oxley is probably one of the later ones that we've seen come into play where it's had a profound impact on the way the economy works and the way businesses interact. In Europe, we see right now this whole focus on the sensitivity of privacy and being able to look at compliance relative to where data sits, what's used with data, and that's kind of really kind of creating some problems when you start to look at how cross-border commerce occurs or how cross-border functions can take place. We see on the other side is sort of a real focus on what we call the winning standards or kind of soft regulation. A lot of times we see it's in the form of some sort of certification, but what we see is governments looking to accelerate the adoption to gain benefit, and policymakers the same way. But when we look at it and kind of drive towards this view of how do we get to the point of taking advantage of the various different technologies, the various different capabilities that can be deployed. We're very focused on that. I think if you look in the US, this whole thing around smart grid, smart cities, they're really trying to establish frameworks and roadmaps so that adoption can happen quicker. And so as we look at this, it kind of frames a bit of the policy question as well, when we talk about it, is it around a protective aspect of it, or is it trying to drive more adoption or kind of a winning standards approach? So I want to close with that so we can kind of get to sit down, and I'll turn it over to Bob.
Thanks, Joe. Bob?
So they'll need to change the slide. So what I'm going to do is focus on...
There we are.
Oh, we'll get there. I'm going to focus specifically on the Internet of Things and what we call the Internet of Everything. And what are for example, we've talked yesterday at the opening, we talked about and we heard about the forecast that we're looking at 50 billion smart objects by the year 2020. That's probably an underestimate. We're really talking about looking at trillions of objects. So we tend to think about not just the Internet of Things, the things are generating the data, but the Internet of Everything, which is the combination of people, process, data, and things. Or taking that and turning it upside down, it's the things generate data, but data by itself is not very interesting, right? Until you can make data actionable, right, it's just data. So the question is, how do you move data to information sort of up the pyramid to knowledge and insights? And that really is where analysis takes place. So we see this as more than just the Internet of Things. The things are the place you start. The things generate the data, but then you have to, along the way, provide analysis and judgment that will lead you to decision-making and insights. Now, just one example of that is if there's data about me and there's analysis, people need to know something about me. Maybe where I am, maybe what my purchasing behavior has been in the past, all kinds of things, right? And this is the monetization model for search, for advertising, whether it's Facebook or Google or Twitter, right? It's information that I've generated, and there's relative different amounts of information and analysis. In the area of smart manufacturing, there's different logistics, there's different analysis. But it's moving up the pyramid, and there's judgments that are being made with the analytics. So that raises a whole set of new policy questions related to this Internet of Things and Internet of Everything. And the way I tend to think about this, there are some of these that are technology related and standard, some of the things that Joe talked about. There are other things that are clearly just in the traditional policy legal area, in which traditional policy does not really map on top of the new world. And then there's the intersection of these things, of these policy and technical issues, which are both technology and policy. So on the technical side, there are questions about reliability and scaling and some of the standards questions, right? If we want to get scale to billions of things or hundreds of billions of things. Then on the policy, pure policy side, Joe mentioned some of the cross-border data flow questions, right? Where is the information going? Where is it in the cloud? Are there traditional trade issues that could intervene and prevent the use of data being generated to improve performance of, for example, aircraft engines, right? GE is selling not just engines, it's selling thrust. GE is monitoring tens of thousands of times per hour various metrics within an engine and knows before a pilot does what changes might be made, or even if a part of an engine needs to be replaced the next time the plane lands. Now, a plane is not, it's in the air and it's traveling globally, so the data are being generated in one country or maybe over the ocean and is being sent to another country. This is not something where the data can be kept within national borders. What are the implications? There are traditional legal regulatory models. And then in this middle area of standards and interoperability, privacy, security, and then there's one issue that some of us have talked about here that tends to not even be on the radar screen: spectrum. Virtually all of these devices that are going to be connected, the tens of billions of devices, are going to be connected by radio. And the types of spectrum, the types of devices and the requirements for spectrum are going to be very heterogeneous. Some of it's going to be very short distance from my stomach to my iPhone. In other cases, it's going to be from a farmer's field miles back to a point. Short distance, long distance. Some of it's going to be very bursty, a pill that says, I'm here. That's all it says, at low data rate. In other cases, it's going to be continuous video from video monitoring traffic for traffic control, and it's going to be high bandwidth. So we have short distance, long distance, bursty continuous, narrow band, broadband, right? And the spectrum required to meet those different needs is going to be different. It's going to be very heterogeneous, but we are going to need some form of harmonization, interoperability, and global standards in order to get the scale. So these are the kinds of issues that I see that fit nicely into Joe's paradigm with the Internet of Everything. And these are the policy and technical issues that we're going to have to resolve to really drive this, what we believe is the next market transition that in 20 years, maybe it's 15 years, maybe it's 10 years, is going to be 10 to 20 times greater than we've seen already with the history of the Internet. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. I think that does a good job of sort of framing where technology and policy overlap. I know there's, I've seen the badges, I've seen a lot of regulators here, and I assume they're here because they want to do a better job of, helping oversee these markets. I know from dealing with the FCC and other regulatory agencies, just figuring out how to do their job with the current environment of phones and other smart devices is challenging enough. As we get to these Internet of Things, what are some of the things that you think regulators should be keeping an eye? How should they be thinking about their roles and responsibilities as it relates to this increasing array of devices? Whichever of you wants to start.
So if we think about regulators or governments, whether it's a city, a state, a nation, a lot of times you think about, well, what is their objective beyond staying in power? But it's normally the way they stay in power is by improving quality of life, attracting investment or attracting business to kind of grow and kind of fund everything that they want, and then do it all at a reasonable efficiency. So if you think about public safety, well, that's all about well, that contributes to quality of life. It also contributes to the attractiveness of investment. So if you look at that and you start to say, well, what should they be looking at? Those are the types of things that they need to be driving towards, and it's everything that Bob put up there, which is looking at how do I drive the right level of investment into the infrastructure? How do I protect through privacy and security? And then the broader thing is like, how do I drive adoption so that value can be created, so quality of life can be driven? Internet of Things is where we hear about it extensively is in cities, and the way cities look at how can I better manage my traffic, how can I better manage the water, how can I better manage public safety? So the focus.
To put it in concrete terms, one of the Internet of Things sounds very vague and nebulous. When I was in Barcelona, they have things where they're putting sensors underneath each of the public parking spots. So they get a sense of, again, I think it gets more interesting as we talk about the concrete.
Yeah, but that's exactly right. So Barcelona is probably one of the most connected cities in the world. So it's not just sensors in parking places to reduce congestion. In fact, in urban areas, 30% of traffic congestion are people just looking for parking spaces. So if we can point them to a parking space and they can park, congestion is relieved. But Barcelona is also, they've tagged trash bins. Is something full, it has to be picked up now, or it's going to overflow and create other problems, or is it empty and I don't have to send the truck there? So Barcelona is one of the most connected cities. And by the way, notwithstanding the economic downturn in Southern Europe and Spain, Barcelona has actually had a surplus budget, in part because they've become smart and they're using IT. But going back to Joe's point, right, those are all decisions that government has made as a matter of policy, being smart about using IT, integrating it into their use. It had nothing to do with traditional telecom regulation. It had nothing to do with the traditional regulators. And in fact, as a former regulator being at the FCC for a very long time, one of the things that I always recommend to regulators is take a deep breath, be humble, and don't think that you know the answer, especially when it comes to new technology and new technology trends, because frankly, if you move too quickly or in the wrong direction or send the wrong signal to the market, you can screw it up. You can, not accelerate, but you can hamper investment, you can hamper innovation. There do need to be, sort of safeguards to make sure that something is not anti-competitive or anti-consumer. But in the areas that we're looking at and the way the markets are moving quickly and technology is moving, don't regulate theoretical problems. Become an enabler. Let things go, and good things happen. That's what we've seen from the internet.
Mm-hmm. Are there some specific areas where you think regulators ought to be cautious, where you think there's a real danger of regulating too soon?
Yes.
That you're seeing?
The one that we're seeing now because of the sort of macro debates about privacy and security, there are regulators who, for example, are very concerned about protecting people's privacy when it comes to some of the new applications that are being developed for location-based services for shopping and so on.
It strikes me as kind of crazy. There was no attention, and then all of a sudden there'll be a spike, and it'll be like, oh my God, the Maps app knows exactly where I am. Well, of course, it's a Maps app. It needs to know.
Well, exactly. So the question there is, as an industry, we really need to think about how do we provide consumers choice and control and transparency, right? Do I, in a very simple way, do I know what a map app is doing with my information, and do I have the ability to have different settings on giving me choices of how I want that to be used? And we also need to be baking in or designing privacy by design and bake it in initially. Right. If we can address those issues, we can lower the temperature of the debate instead of having, regulators leap in and regulate prematurely, which could have a negative effect on the development of new services.
So if you look and think, though, that your challenge of watch what you do and don't go theoretical is if you look at the credit card problem that hit everybody at Christmas, the tens of million to 100 million cardholders, you turn around and you say, oh, we need to regulate that. You can regulate and then obstruct actually the progress or the innovation that needs to kind of come out, instead of looking at it from the perspective of, well, there were actually some really bad decisions made as opposed to a regulatory problem. And, so how do you kind of match that? Because the government could come in, or policymakers could come in and just create a whole raft of obstacles into the continued advancement of sort of e-commerce and mobile commerce in sort of a knee-jerk.
And the worst kind, then again, what I've seen is that what would concern me the most would be something that would result in a technology mandate. Yeah. In other words, government determining what the technology should be as opposed to providing a functional goal of this is a problem, solve the problem, you figure out how to do it, as opposed to government picking the way to do it.
Great, so if everything needs to be encrypted, right, that might be a path. Well, people are figuring out, I've already talked to some people, it's like they figured out how you can do analytics on encrypted data without unencrypting it. Now the problem is it takes forever to do it today, but theoretically it's possible. So once that's possible, then you can start to whittle down and sort of make it more practical to do it. But the issue is there's always somebody that can figure out how do I get around some of the technical issues that you're going to be putting in place or constraints. Then you can open it up. And it gets towards some of the issues with security and privacy. A lot of times security and privacy are at odds. The more secure you are, the less private you are. And the more private you are, well, fundamentally, there's a lot of security issues because you...
I also wanted to raise a question because I think it came up both in terms of privacy and security, and then in a sec I want to get into bandwidth and spectrum, that oftentimes necessarily regulation is governed by some sort of geography, whether it's the state or local level or the national level. And it strikes me that increasingly these issues are beyond national borders. And, it's a tricky problem. There's not some short two-word answer, but how do we, as citizens and as regulators and as industry, recognize the global nature while still legislating at whatever those regional levels are? Are there ways to have a more global mindset and still deal with that data that's flying in an airplane over the ocean?
I think part of the challenge with policy, and we look at policymakers, is they are subject to their constituency, and they're not looking at, Korea has a certain policy approach to things that's very different than the U.S., it's very different than China, than India, than, you look at it, and the outcome is different. And they were seeking to address the needs of their population when they did that. Or each sure. Hopefully each regulator is doing that. They can have some very long-term goals that may seem in the short term to be somewhat dysfunctional. But what they're doing is they're trying to put in place sort of as I talked about, the protection aspect of things. How do I protect my citizenry or constituents? And then on the other side is how do I kind of drive the innovation, drive the value creation, drive the adoption of these new capabilities? And they got to balance the two. But it always goes back to, well, what are they trying to accomplish? And it's the goals that are kind of pretty universal, as I said, beyond staying in power. But the way they stay in power is by having a higher or an improving quality of life, public safety and all of that, and then also the growing economy, so the additional investment.
And I think to your point, you mentioned around Barcelona, the part of it was the mindset of we're investing to make things better versus we're regulating to prevent.
That's right, and it's an enabling attitude. And in fact, what I'm seeing globally in terms of trends is that government officials, some very forward-looking government officials at the municipal level, but beyond municipalities, to regional, provincial, and national levels, they really now are understanding ICT as an enabler for their citizenry, whether it's providing better healthcare solutions, education, fostering business, attracting investment. And there's still some legacy conversations about being protective, especially in countries where large incumbents, and I don't necessarily mean telco incumbents, and there's incumbencies of all kinds.
Some might call both of your companies incumbents.
Well, some people would call us incumbents, but I'm thinking also, you have in some countries, it could be the railroads. It could be the energy. It could be different ministries with different things. But what I'm seeing increasingly is that there are people, and even at heads of state, who understand that this sector can unleash really important economic growth and activity and provide increased welfare for citizens. So there is a new debate which is really about how do we unleash, not just protect the past. And that, to me, is a really important distinction.
So it's a great thing. If we look at where a lot of the smarter city stuff plays out is in China, and it's like a competition between the cities or between the provinces, and it affects the policy within the province or within the city. And they focus on things like healthcare, or they focus on quality of life, as well as the ability to drive economic activity. But that is their focus, and that's how they perceive as their rise. As they do that, then they're successful at growing their economy or the lives of their constituents.
We're almost out of time, but I did want to get your thoughts on that spectrum and policies around that. I'm curious, two things around that. How do you recommend, what would your advice to regulators be, the balance between having an abundance of licensed spectrum that can be used versus unlicensed like Wi-Fi that's allowed for a different kind of innovation? And then also, how much do regulators need to look at not only what is their national spectrum, but I suspect that part of the keys for success for some of these smaller countries is to harmonize the spectrum they make available with that's in bigger geographies.
Yeah.
Well, so, one thing is always look at it is if you're regulating spectrum, why are you regulating it? What are you trying to accomplish? And you're trying to drive the right levels of investment. And if you keep your eye on why are you driving that level of investment, it's to create quality of life on one side, but also economic differential or economic competitiveness. And if you look at it from that perspective, you make a certain type of decision. You can have a long-term view or a short-term view, and everyone will have a different one. And incumbency plays a role in that. But then when you look at something like licensed versus unlicensed, there's an inevitability of things that'll play out. And I think you said before, it's just like don't look at in the theoretical. It's like yes, we want it all to be spectrum to be licensed because we make money when it's licensed, and we can see the direct investments that are made off of that licensing of the spectrum, whereas unlicensed, we don't really have that much control.
But we get things like Wi-Fi.
Yeah, so the short answer is it's a false choice. We need both.
Yeah. Oh, no.
Right? And what we're looking at with our data forecasts, especially with mobile and the compounded annual growth rate of that, we see an absolute need for more spectrum at lower frequencies for licensed 3G, 4G. No reason to, if you don't have 3G, forget it, just leapfrog to LTE and beyond. So there's a need for more licensed, but we also see a dramatically increased need for unlicensed. So the next standard for Wi-Fi is 802.11 AC. That's going to be 80 megahertz or 160 megahertz channels, not the 20 megahertz or 40 from before. The only place that we're going to get that is up at 5 gigahertz. So you look at the characteristics, propagation characteristics, the spectrum characteristics, and so in both of those cases, that's for broadband. It's going to be somewhat continuous, but not necessarily, which is very different than some of the opportunistic use of bursty narrowband, which can be shared in new ways using some of the new opportunistic use of allocated but unassigned spectrum, such as the television white space, which is very different. And so the short answer is yes, all of the above.
Yeah.
Well, I hate to cut you guys off, but they're flashing a little red sign. And I take that sign to mean next year, this was a great discussion. Next year, no slides so we can have more discussion.
There we go.
But
That sounds good.
all right, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
A very special mahalo to the 2014 PTC Board of Governors for their year-round leadership and support. PTC'14 is made possible in part by the generosity of the PTC'14 sponsors. Mahalo to each of the PTC'14 Platinum sponsors. Thank you for all of your support. Christian Michaud, Senior Vice President with Tata Communications, will lead a keynote discussion about competing with free in international voice communications.
So thank you very much for attending the Tuesday keynote. It is my pleasure to introduce Mr. Christian Michaud. He is the Senior Vice President of Product and Business Strategy in the Global Voice Solution Business Unit for Tata Communications. Mr. Michaud is responsible for developing the business unit's overall strategy as well as leading the product management and business development. He has over 20 years' experience in international telecommunications. He is a member of the steering committee of the I3 Forum, a global organization of carriers and operators with mandate to foster the transition to an IP environment. Mr. Michaud holds graduate and undergraduate degrees in economics from the Université de Montréal. He is here today to present on competing with free solutions to innovate, stay pertinent, and be profitable with international voice communications. Now, please welcome to the stage Mr. Michaud.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning, and thank you for being in the room to listen to my presentation. So you'll notice that in my title there, you don't have compete with free, because I sort of thought that was a provocative title, but I will talk about competing with free during my talk. And I think, the obvious way to compete with free would be to pay your customer to use your services. Not too sure what it does to your P&L, but, it's one way. And sometimes when I look at the industry, I wonder if some of our industry members have not thought about this strategy and used it to the business. But more seriously, I think what I want to discuss today is what can we do as carrier in the carrier community to support the retail service provider, the mobile operator, to be more efficient to compete in the environment, which, as you know, has changed a lot in the recent year, a lot of disruption, a lot of changes to the business model and to the technology, which is a challenge for the service provider. So just before I go to the next slide, let me ask you a few questions. So how many of you in the room, and if you don't mind just raising your hands, how many of you in the room have smartphones? I would assume most. Yeah? How many of you don't? No one's, okay, good. So on your smartphone, let's think about your smartphone for a minute. How many apps do you have on your smartphone? And let me ask the question. So below 10, less than 10 apps on your smartphone, how many people? Okay, a few. All right, between, let's say, 10 and 25. Okay, it's getting there. Over 25? Okay, so we're seeing that there's a good crowd that have over 25. So, and think about the apps that you have, right? So let's say you have 30, 40 apps. So how many do you use on a weekly basis? What sort of usage? Do you use them all? Do you use half of it? Let's say you use 25% of your apps on a weekly basis, 1 quarter. Half? All? Wow. There's a few. I'm impressed. If you have over 30 apps and using them all, I'm very impressed. Okay. And just quickly another question. if you think about the ecosystem, who do you think have the strongest brand in the ecosystem between the mobile operator, the apps developer, and the social media, right? Think about your mobile operator in your own market, social media, and the app developer. Who thinks the mobile operator has the strongest brand? Not a lot, okay. Apps developer? Obviously not. Social media, right? The rest of the crowd. Okay, so let's look at some interesting statistics, right? So a typical smartphone user will have about 41 apps installed on their phone and will be using about 16 on a weekly basis, which is pretty good if you think about it. Now, the question is, how do you monetize all this? What's the revenue model around that? And how do you make money with this, right? So some number in front of you that seems interesting to me, right? The ARPU for mobile user, it's $150 per year. What the slide doesn't show you is that has been going like this for the last few years, right? So it's decreasing very fast. But still, there's a good amount of monetization, mainly through data package, right? Because they need data package to get to their apps. The user, I mean, they need data package, right? The other interesting stats is, for a lifetime on apps, a user, in average, would spend $2.46. Lifetime. This is nothing, right? So this is the free part of the business, right? You use your apps, you don't pay, or you pay very little, or you pay a lot if it's really a valuable apps. The last stats is also interesting in the ecosystem is the advertising, and use Facebook as a stats, but you can think of other business model, reselling the data, whatever. But this is interesting. $460 on a yearly basis, advertising revenue. That was 2012, if I remember correctly. And this is increasing very fast, right? So the alternative business model is changing and increasing very fast. But what's interesting about that, just before we go to the next slide, is the ecosystem means that it's an ecosystem. So everybody needs everybody. Yeah, the mobile operator, we are complaining about the OTT, needs the OTT to generate good apps, so people buy larger data package. The app provider needs to have good mobile network so they can push their content and game or whatever to the app provider. So it's a true ecosystem that we're facing right now. So from a smartphone user, what does it mean? It means there's a lot of choice, there's a lot of way to communicate. It means that there's a bunch of cool features that are coming in all the time. It's free or low cost. But it also some downside, right? It's very fragmented. We're talking about a bunch of islands that bring capability within their island but don't really talk to each other. A lot of features, and sometimes confusing. People, they get a new app, not too sure it works, you test it one or twice. If you're not very fond of apps, you're going to let it go and move to the next one. So there's challenge in terms of pushing it to the user. And most of the time, there's very little control on the quality. And the customer experience can vary a lot from apps provider to apps provider. So what does this mean for the application provider? For the application provider, huge competition in the market, very low revenue, constant pressure to innovate, bring new ideas, so you really need to be innovative. And you need very strong network, as I said, to support your application. For the mobile operator, well, they're faced with their ARPU going down, and they really need to protect that ARPU and find ways to monetize what's going on in the market. A lot of CapEx, maintain the network, traffic, and everybody's talking about it. And you need new service to remain relevant to your operator, because very fast, everybody's talking about it, dumb pipe. So there's nothing new there, but this is putting the table together. But for the carrier, what it means we're facing a new ecosystem of interconnect. For most wholesale providers, this is still something they're discovering. How do I make this thing work? You must be ready to offer converged services. So today, services are still mostly offered at the carrier level, very siloed, right? Voice, IP, VPN, MPLS, and video, and so on. And they're one after the other. Sometimes it's bundled and more effective in bundling, but converged services is still not very seen in the market. And the sophistication that is needed in this new environment and the complexity is increasing very fast. So basically, we're looking at that and we say, okay, there's 3 areas where carrier can help the service provider. If we think about carriers, is what are our core competency as a carrier? What are we good at? And what can we bring to the service provider to move around in that new environment? Well, business efficiency. Most wholesale operators will have a very large volume of either IP, voice, and I'll talk about voice as an example later, but very good system to control, so efficiency. New revenue stream, so changing the business model, help them to bring new revenue stream to the service provider. And the last area would be, what can we do to help them bring new innovative services, either by ourselves, suggesting services, or bringing the capability to do new services. So let me give you those three areas. So first area, efficiency. So in the world of voice, what does it mean? In the voice world is, we're facing a lot of challenge in terms of complexity of the market. A lot of new requirements, and the migration to IP has brought opportunities around HD voice, but that brought this challenge with fraud, with different codec, a lot more complex than in the past, and it's very challenging for the operator to manage in this environment. So we suggested an application, what we call voice business app portfolio, basically a solution for service provider depending on their needs. So you would have either a bucket of expertise that we can bring to customer aggregation, supplier aggregation, or a bunch of tools and system, pricing, billing, and quality control, fraud monitoring, and so on, and also network capability. So basically, as we have the scale and as we have a lot of tools that we've developed over time to manage our business, we've decided to partition our tools and say, okay, let's make it available to the customer so they can get access to actual tools that are used very efficiently to grow their business and manage their business. So the context and the concept of the voice business app is like a menu. You go to a restaurant, you can choose the full menu, say, I want everything, I'll rely on you to do the network infrastructure, I want all the systems, or you can say, well, I'd like a bit of, I'm very good at billing, fully integrated, but I'm challenged with my routing, and I'd like to extend my network in those areas I don't want. So basically, the concept is that you choose from this to maximize the value. They don't have to take everything. They make a decision, and they can increase efficiency in the areas where they really need it. And I just thought of raising an example that we did. UPC is a cable operator in Europe. They're operating in about 7 or 8 countries, if I remember correctly. And they had a number of voice network with different platforms, different systems, and basically they were challenged with some of the tools that they were using. So basically we came over, took over the infrastructure, and provided them a solution around fraud control, monitoring, and routing, where those were the pain point from them, and making them more and more efficient in this area. So that's one area where we can help them to compete with free, quote unquote, compete with the disruptor, because by making them very efficient, they can focus on bringing service to the end user, and they're not supporting very high costs, which make them uncompetitive in the market. Now let's look at how do we create new revenue, bring new revenue opportunities. And I'll take the example of mobile VoIP, which, by the way, we've announced yesterday the launch of a white label mobile VoIP services. But basically the concept with mobile VoIP, and maybe before I go into the concept, let me ask you a few more questions. How many of you have, when you come to this hotel or come to Hawaii, have shut down the data roaming on your smartphone? Who shut down the data roaming? Wow, a lot of people let it active. So how many of you make calls using roaming calls, like actually you're roaming and making calls? Nobody. All right, that's very enlightening, the fact, nobody, right? So nobody is using their phone. So what are you using to make calls? How many of you are using Skype? How many of you are using local brands of mobile VoIP? A Viber or whoever? Okay. So the others are not calling home, I guess. Okay, that's fine. So the concept that we've thought about is, what if we were able to provide the service provider, the mobile operator, a mobile solution that basically is feature-rich in terms of capability and enables them to launch their own branded mobile VoIP operation, which is similar to Skype, but will have more features, will be rich, and will be adaptive to their business model. So that's why we decided to introduce mobile VoIP. And basically what it is, and this is just a mock-up, this is not really the way it's going to look, but it's just to explain that It's totally white label, so it's going to be the color of the service provider. It's going to have all the basic features like present, IM, SMS, voice, video calls, and so on. It will have a lot of rich content interface with your address book, but your Facebook, your various accounts. And it will have also an enhanced feature. It has an enhanced feature like audio conferencing, video conferencing, follow me, voicemail, and so on. So by using this, what we're doing in the market, what we're trying to do with the service provider is, what's your business model? What are you trying to do in the market? Are you trying to address your roamers? You have a lot of roamers traveling abroad and you want to maintain ownership. They're shutting down their roaming, but you want to maintain your brand in front of them. You want them to use your capabilities, right? So we have a model around that. You extend the reach of their services. They want to address ethnic markets that they cannot address today. So mobile VoIP is a good example. They want to replace their calling card model, which is going down. They need new technology. They want to differentiate for competitor, offering integrated services, voice, video, conferencing, and so on. Or they want even generate enterprise services on the SMB market. Basically going after the small and business. There's class 5 capabilities on the platform, short dialing, could use that to address that. So the model is not only to compete with free, is to find ways to monetize, to adapt to their reality and monetize the platform. The third way I've described quickly at the beginning was to deploy new and innovative services. And in this area for carriers, this is more challenging, right? But if you think about it, new services is really C2C, peer-to-peer types of application. There's B2C also. So how do you go as a carrier to the level there and bring them solution? But the way we look at that is, okay, let's go back to our core competency. Let's not try to invent stuff we don't know about. What are we good at? We're good at connecting HD voice, connecting mobile VoIP. We're looking at voice LTE. We're looking at hosted 4G voice application and so on. So we said, why don't we use our core competency to offer them solution? So just to illustrate what I'm talking about, first example is HD voice. So a bit more than a year ago, we launched our HD voice services for international connectivity. So HD voice, of course, you're going to tell me no innovation there, right? It's from the smartphone. There's a codec. It's HD. You need to enable it in your domestic network. The innovation part is, today, if you look at HD voice, whatever it is out there, it's the domestic call. But there's no international call because nobody can guarantee that your HD call will be carried internationally, will stay HD. So what we looked at, okay, let's find a solution. We're good at that. We'll find a solution to carry HD, make sure it's IP out of the way, keep it on an IP codec, transcode it to another HD codec if needed, or even to a narrowband if there's no solution. Make sure the calls get there. So those are the type of solution that we brought. And this is a portfolio solution that we're looking at to enable the voice over LTE. So in the voice over LTE, there's going to be a lot of challenges to connect your calls internationally. So you look at international connection, carriers are focused on their domestic market. So internationally, routing, addressing, the reach, the roaming capabilities, interworking, all of these are challenges that the service provider needs assistance, and we can innovate in those areas as carrier to bring solution. So as a wrap-up, 3 areas where we can really help the service provider. We can help them to become much more efficient. We can help them to find new revenue stream. And we can help them with innovation. So basically, I think as carrier, we can bring a lot of solution to the service provider to stay pertinent and to grow revenue and profitably in this environment. Thank you very much.
This truly is a game changer in the industry. We're changing the way business is currently being done. We, as Digital Realty, are the only data center provider out there that can do this. And the internet community is excited about this. Digital Realty Open Internet Exchange is an environment that we've created within our data centers. We, as a data center provider, will just give them the environment and we let the community itself operate the exchange. we are giving the internet community something they've been waiting for, and that is an environment that allows them to provide a better product with significantly lower costs. The current internet exchanges are run in a much more controlled manner. This has created the limitations that the internet community is facing and have become very frustrated with. The exchanges are in our facilities. Customers need to be in our facilities. Connectivity is the key component for data to get from point A to point B. Data comes into a data center to be stored, to be secured, and to be sent somewhere. The connectivity initiative is we're tying all of our data centers together and extending them into the current exchange points. This then creates the ability to get the traffic that's required from our customers and to our customers over our ecosystem. We are creating a new environment, a better environment. Our customers are going to want to do business with us for simply the ease of doing business with us, the strength of the company, the quality of product that we deliver, and the environment that exists within our data centers.
Are you plugged into social media? Then join the conversation online. Follow PT Council on Twitter and use the PTC'14 hashtag, which is #PTC'14. You can also like Pacific Telecommunications Council on Facebook.
In the fast-paced world of communications, there is uncertainty. How do I connect safely to the cloud? How do I protect my data from an attack? TW Telecom has the answers. As a leader in delivering business Ethernet, our network connections are secure, scalable, and predictable. Our resilient Ethernet and innovative services deliver faster, better, and easier solutions for you. TW Telecom, moving your business forward.
Next, let's join a keynote panel on advanced networks.
Well, thank you for joining us here today. I really appreciate your time for our fireside chat. Missing the fireplace, but that's good. All right. Get a little flamethrower going, right? Yeah. All right. I find it fascinating that the definition of SDN that is currently emerging focuses somewhat less on the decoupling of the data and the control plane and more on providing programmatic interfaces into networking equipment. And as a result of this effort, enterprises and carriers will gain what I perceive unprecedented network programmability, automation, and control, enabling highly scalable, flexible solutions that readily adapt to changing business needs. And that's the real crux of this question, that we readily adapt to changing business needs. So here's the question. How will Level 3 implement this functionality that makes the network application aware, and how will Juniper provide it?
Okay, cool. Sure. Yeah, I'd say that at this point we don't really have much to implement because there's, while there's a lot of science experiments going on in the marketplace right now with the different vendors, there's not something meaningful enough for Level 3 to actually execute on in our network. Now, the way that we envision this happening is that right now we see most of the progress seeming to be made across layers if you break it down into the different stacks of the network. And I would envision that our initial implementations of SDN are going to probably be small experimental deployments along layer 1, the optical layer, layer 2, and layer 3. But ultimately, we really do believe in the vision that we've got to be able to drill down through the layers and get every stack communicating with each other. And the whole issue around application, the network being application aware is a really good point because there's just so much room for efficiency in the networks today if we could achieve that goal. I mean, every service, every application being provisioned with its own bandwidth and with its with its own class of service on the network, and without the communication going down through the network to be able to take advantage of available capacity that's set aside for one application when there is some kind of a network fault or problem on the network, or being able to make priority decisions between those is really, it just creates tremendous room for improvement and efficiency in the overall function of the network through the layer of the stacks. So we really believe in that vision of trying to achieve that and use SDN to help us get there. But as far as implementation right now, we're still feel like we're largely in kind of the science experiment stage of it.
I would agree with that. I think SDN is not an answer right now. It's a question, and we have exploration to do.
Yeah.
And it's interaction between vendors and providers who use it that'll get us to the right place in this whole thing. One of the things we talk about applications controlling the network. If you pop up a level, what you have is people saying, I want more control over my network. I want more efficiencies, as Paul just said. I want to be able to use the resources I have better. And to do that, I need agility. One of the analogies I like to use is compute virtualization. Compute virtualization is great technology. But the big question is, so what? And what compute virtualization gives you is a much more efficient use of a server. If I put one dedicated application on a server, I'm not using my server well. If I put 5 VMs and I can put more and I can put less, I am using my server more efficiently. And I need the orchestration that says, I'm going to put 5 VMs there. And if one of them is suffering because the others are taking too much CPU or memory, I'll move it away. So that ability to be agile is what makes compute virtualization such a powerful thing today. Not emulating one CPU over another. That's technology. But the actual business case. So I think that's what we want to explore. So to your point about what kind of interfaces, what kind of APIs do you show? Well, Juniper always wants to do things in an open standards way. And one of the things we're looking at is instead of actually having an API, a programmatic API, we're looking at data models. Tell me what are the resources you want to optimize. Tell me what are the parameters you want to play with. And then, whether it's bandwidth at layer 1, whether it's resiliency, because part of layer 1 is, can I get the right resiliency? Is it something going on at layer 3? Is it something going on at layer 4 to 7? What are the parameters you want to play with? And can I give it to you in a data model that captures the semantics of this, not just here's an API in C or in Python or whatever your favorite language is. And so we're looking at creating standard data models that captures the kind of control you want on your network. And then, and I think this is something we need to play with.
Yeah, to add to that, I think that your point about an open API is really critical. One of the things that as running product management, that is kind of a golden rule that maybe other product managers in the audience will share is that you never roll out a product that is completely dependent upon one vendor's equipment, where you become, it may be a great little flash thing that you can do and it's cool whiz-bang stuff for now, but then if nobody else if you don't have an ability to replicate that in other parts of the network, go across vendor platforms, then you really put yourself in a bad position for the future because you don't know how dedicated that vendor is to what you're doing and what you want them to do. So that's one of the biggest problems that we see with it. And I really think that a lot of the kind of experimental implementations we've seen so far has been a lot with vendors that say, okay, well, I teamed with this company. I'm a layer 1 company. I teamed with this layer 2 company or this layer 3 company to do this, and then we brought in this software company to do this, and look at this great thing that we did to prove in. It's great to prove in as to show what is the art of the possible, but it's not. It's not something that a big carrier can implement and productize and roll out as a service to companies because of reasons like that.
Yeah, it reminds me of a story I heard recently from a large bank in New Jersey. They told me they had 6 more inches of rain during Hurricane Sandy. Their largest data center would have been wiped out. And what they would have liked to have done is 24 hours prior to Sandy arriving, they would have liked to have provisioned additional bandwidth to a backup data center and start moving all their virtual machines from that data center out of harm's way. Unfortunately, for them to get the wavelengths, set up these switches, the LAN switches, and to go to the applications group, fire up the virtual machines, move the data stores, in their view, takes them anywhere from 1 to 3 months. So, you know, what they were looking for is a solution that would allow them to do this in literally 15 minutes. And this has been demonstrated. This has been demonstrated layers 1 through 7, completely application aware, where an SDN controller sees a condition where you're going into server overload, it automatically provisions the wavelengths, automatically provisions the switches, and then kicks off through VMware and vSphere and vMotion and vStorage the migration of these virtual machines. So we can show this working. We've actually demonstrated it. But the question is, how do we implement it? How do we roll it out? How do we make sure that it's open? Yeah. And I think that's the real key, is we talk about all these different layers, okay? And I'm at layer 1, you're kind of at layer 2, and we need people that are going to take this right up through layer 7. How do we do that? Do we need a systems integrator to partner with us? How do we take that forward?
Well, I mean, if we go all the way up into layer 7, and yes, we're at level 3 doesn't have the kind of software expertise to really work at it all the way up to those layers, and that would be a pretty big extension for us to try to build that capability and come up with that. So I think systems integrators this may be a possible role for them to play in coming in and helping out with us, helping out with that. There can be, I mean, that's the great thing about as this technology evolves, is that new roles are going to emerge in the marketplace for different people to come up with different solutions. You know, we could, you know, level 3 could work out with our vendors the layers 1 through 3. And then other companies could come in and bring in, you know, and if we can do that in an open standards way, then there can be companies that emerge that work at the upper layers to offer different, you know, types of ways for us to package our service with them to create a totally new service. Just the way that apps have evolved off of these different mobile platforms and everybody has a different spot in that ecosystem piece. So there's a lot of ways that it could be, that it could emerge.
It seems like virtual machine mobility, workload balancing, these are new capabilities that didn't exist 5, 6, 7 years ago within data centers. Within data centers, there's been such dramatic change in the last 5 years. Mm-hmm. And that's causing dramatic change. You know, we've got server virtualization, storage virtualization. What we're missing is the network virtualization.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And so what's your view of that?
Well, I agree completely. And that's why I gave the analogy starting from compute virtualization, that the orchestration is the big difference there. And now that needs to leak into the network, not only the network in the data center, but the network between data centers, between the users and the data center. So the ability to do all this network virtualization and network orchestration. But I think one of the things, we now are beginning to talk about high IQ networks. And I think, to your point, I think, you know, where do system integrators come in? Juniper does write software, but we don't write enough software, and we can't cover all of this. One of the things that we want to do is make these APIs, these data models available. And I think Paul talked about the multi-layers, right? So you have layer 1, layer 2, layer 3, and then you have all the layers above. Make them available and give people the ability to then say, I can take these different things that are happening at the different layers and use that to orchestrate my network. One of the things that people talk about in this whole process is they talk about automation and orchestration. They don't talk enough about analytics. And I think now they're beginning to talk about analytics. For me, when you close the loop, I'm going to, you know, place a service here, you know, whether it's place a VM here or put a VPN here or put a Lambda here. I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that based on analytics. I understand what the application wants. I understand what the consumer wants. I understand what the network needs. Place something here, and then constantly monitor it and say, hey, this worked yesterday, but there's a shelf life for optimization. That shelf life is expired. I need to re-optimize. I need to move this from here to here. So you're talking about, you know, vMotion. There's storage motion. Yeah. There's also network functionality motion. So I have a firewall here, but I need to move it here because that's where the action is. I have a VPN instance here, I need to move it there. There's a Lambda that's going this way, but I need to move it in a different direction. And so I need to close the loop. It's not enough to say, I did a good job of optimizing now. I need to do it again, and I need to do it constantly. And that whole loop, I think, Juniper is not going to do that, right? We can say, here's the analytics, here's the ability to orchestrate the network, especially layer 2 and above. Someone else will do layer 1. You guys are there. But someone needs to put the whole thing together. And someone needs to say, this is how I close the loop. And someone needs to talk to level 3 and other providers and say, what do you guys want? How do you see this loop? What's your business rule for placing a circuit here or a VPN there or a firewall somewhere else? And incorporate all that into saying, I have a network that's responsive. So I think the key things that you want the network to become is agile and responsive. So to your point about Sandy and 6 inches of rain, right? What if I didn't actually have to push a button? I didn't have to send someone there. I can actually sense that, hey, my circuits are not doing well. Maybe there's, the fiber is getting wet. I don't know what happens when fiber gets wet. Or maybe there's a bend in the fiber and my bit error rate is going up. Proactively move stuff around, right? So make the network intelligent. And so that's why we talk about high IQ networks.
And I think that your virtualization of the server analogy is interesting because today we can fire up virtual machines on demand. I don't have to go into the server. I don't have to open it up. I don't have to play with any cables. I basically set it up once and I leave. And everything else is configured in software. Why can't we take that model and put it right onto the network where I configure the network once and everything else is logically done in software so I don't have to touch it again? Yeah. And does that model work? Do you think economically that model works to build it ahead of time and provide that type of service offering versus building it piecemeal when the customer wants it? Because it's that whole agility issue that's getting in the way, right? This whole new paradigm where we need to have agility and speed and access versus waiting 3 weeks for a provider to provide me with the circuits, right? And I think that's the analogy. I was curious if you see that same thing being required with the network, and is it economically feasible to do that? I think that's the big question.
I'll pick up on one thing. You've mentioned a couple of times, it takes me 6 months to do this, and or 3 months, and I want to do it in 15 minutes. There's a different aspect to this, which is, I think, really important too. And I don't know if level 3 sees this, but I know that a number of people see this, which is the expression fail fast, right? What does fail fast mean? It means I can experiment with things. I can see if they work. If they work, great. I'll put more into it. I'll productize it and whatever. If it doesn't, I'll move on to the next one. And I can't do that if it takes too long and it's too expensive. And so this idea of being able to put something up, let's go back to server virtualization. If I think of a new app and I have to buy 50 servers and I have to tell my boss why it's 50 and not 10 and not 100, it just takes too long. And if I get it wrong, I get fired. But if I bring up 50 VMs and play with that and say, yeah, that was too many, I can pull back to 20, right? That works. And so our ability to do that in the network, to be able to put up a service, to put up some instances and dynamically move around and say, I need more, I need less, and do that at low cost and high speed so I can actually play with things. I don't have to, it's not just, it takes me 3 months to do it. The analysis might take me 6 months. Is it worthwhile from a business point of view? Is it worthwhile from a bunch of, the physics, does the physics work out? I can't do that. I need to be able to experiment with things.
That's very fascinating because people have separate systems in their data centers just for test.
Yes.
But with virtual machine, they just fire it up, test it, bring it down. So there's no longer this dedicated model of test systems anymore. Right. It's dynamic. And we want to bring that right into the network. And I think our customers, our mutual customers, would really like to have that. Yeah. But the question is, how do we deliver it to them? And like we said, I'm an enabler at layer 1, layer 2, 3, 4 through 7. We got to get another player here and another chair. And we all get together. And the first people to do that, the first ones to do this are going to make a real difference. They're going to you're going to get a lot of attention.
But the economics have to work from the carrier, the service provider perspective. ultimately we'll do whatever we think is going to make money. And so there's a few things that figure into that. There's the cost of the technology and implementing it, and the integration piece of it itself, and all that development expense that goes in there. And I think that most carriers like Level 3 do believe in this technology and the future of this technology, and see the promise of the cost savings that it can deliver. But those costs figure into our equation of how, what's the timing and how much energy do we put into it. We are past the days of, doing crazy science experiments and spending a bunch of money just for the sake of showing, people, oh, look at what cool thing that we did. So there's that element, but then there's also the element of then how do we transform that into services for customers, and what are customers going to want to buy, how much are they willing to pay for it, and can we afford to do it for the price that they're willing to pay. And some of the things that strike me about this technology that we've been playing around with in terms of analyzing that is how how are end customers going to use this technology? Let's say that we were able to wave the magic wand and make a service like a burstable service like you were talking about, that in downtown Manhattan that enables all this stuff. What if we were to do that and just say, okay, I've got that at my hands now. How would I sell it? How would I price it? What would they be willing to pay? And there are things that stand out to me that are questions that I don't think that we've been trying to get to, but a lot of people still don't know, and it's still evolving. Things like you don't know how much is a typical large enterprise customer using hybrid cloud services. How often are they going to want to turn up and turn down bandwidth? How much burst excess do they need? How often is it between the same common points? Is it only on the weekends, or is it well distributed out? If we sell this burstable service to 100 different banks, and all of them use it for the same application, and it's always on the weekend, then that economic model isn't going to work for a carrier. Yeah. So those are things, and I talk to customers about this, and I say, well, how would you use it? What would you, and a lot of times that, more often than not, the answer that I get back is that we just don't know because nobody's ever offered it to us before. Exactly. And so maybe there's a certain element to it that is kind of like, I love, the Steve Jobs analogy of, I don't ask customers where we need to go. I tell them where they need to go, kind of a thing. And maybe there's some element of this in that, but that's part of the issues that, at least in our mind as a carrier, is that we're trying to deal with to get our heads around back to the economics question. What's it going to take?
But you could also use the fail fast model there. If it didn't cost you a lot of money to put up a service, sure, and then have customers play with it and say, hey, I really want, I like this, I want to pay you money for it, versus it was a good idea, but let's move on. If it costs you a lot of money to do that, you can't do it. But if you could fail fast and you could do it quickly, easily, and didn't cost a lot, and you could then trial it, then maybe it's something you could play with. So it's not just a technology.
And ultimately, the thing that keeps me really engaged in this is kind of a fear of, look at what happened in the computing industry when companies, what was the storage vendors' motivation for doing virtualization? There's kind of a parallel to like a carrier who's saying, well, gee, I'm selling all these servers, and if I enable all this virtualization, then people are going to need less servers, so I shouldn't do that. Carrier parallel is, gee, I've got this big network, and I'm selling it under 1-year terms, and it gets locked in, and it's a guaranteed revenue stream. Why would I virtualize it and enable people to just consume it on demand? The people making compute and storage, if they had clung to that idea, then they'd be out of business, right? And the carriers, I think, we've got to watch out for that same trap. The thing is, in the end, we want to be where the customers really need us to be, and because they're going to find a path one way or another to that endpoint, and if we don't provide it, then somebody else will.
Well, I think server virtualization is an interesting analogy because it's the only technology in the last 10 years that I've seen that gives you an order of magnitude 5 to 10 times savings. Okay, when I apply that model to storage virtualization, I don't get that. And that's why storage virtualization hasn't really taken off the way server virtualization has taken off. So we apply that same model to the network. Is there 5 to 10 times order of magnitude better by virtualizing the network? Now, the customer's going to love it if you can get them down to those price points. But that's a big question mark.
Yeah.
Do I really get that savings? And maybe it's that decoupling of the control plane, the data plane, and this whole white box initiative, right, where people are going to go out and put in these boxes and put in intelligent controllers. Maybe that is an order of magnitude better. We have yet to see that. I mean, clearly Amazon has shown that they're very willing to invest in that, and it saved them a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that we have some fascinating things to work through here, you know. And I also see another example where today you have customers in the New York area, like you said, and they have dedicated wavelength services from you. But what if level 3 were to come forward and say, on top of that, I'm going to give you an insurance policy that says if you need additional bandwidth on demand, you pay me a certain amount of money, and I'll have this overlay network. And it will be available to 10 customers, not 100. So you can determine your SLAs. You can create priorities of service for 10 customers, large customers, that are looking for that situation where they have a natural disaster, and suddenly they need that extra bandwidth. And level 3 is there to provide it. No other carrier can provide it on demand as an insurance policy. I would think that would be a kind of nice model to have both. You know, they talk today about going to open flow, but also maintaining your existing network. There's got to be a migration path. There has to be a combination of these two solutions together, and they'll compete with one another a little bit. And I think that would be beneficial to customers. I guess
well,
the next
way
big
that we
question-
would approach that, though, today is that, I mean, and maybe this is the network guy's mindset, but we would look at those 10 customers and we would say, okay, if we overlay all this bandwidth, then it could sit there and never be used. And then we'd lay that into the extra cost, and it's effectively you're not doing the same thing. Now, I think another twist on that, though, that may have promise as an experiment, as you said, to test the fast-fail issue, is if you can set up a service between a small number of locations that are really dense with activity, with a lot of traffic potential ups and downs, and a lot of people moving stuff around, then you could actually get a kind of representative sample of what these profiles look like, how people are going to use it. You kind of need enough. You know, you don't need a base of 10 customers that use it every once in a while. That it's a nice little safety mechanism. What you need is a bunch of customers that you never know when they're going to hit, and they're going to grab it and they're going to let it go, and then the next customer is going to do it. That's where you really get some insight into how the economics of these networks
You need
work.
a law of large numbers. You want statistical multiplexing,
Right.
but at different.
But what if you're a cloud provider? I've got 5 cloud providers on the back end, and you're my customer on the front end, and I want to allow you to switch into anyone you want on demand, based on better pricing. I don't want to wait a month to switch from this cloud provider to that. So almost it becomes a service offering the same way that you would offer up anyway.
And then SDN becomes more of a disruption at the business model. I think one of the things that Paul said is, do I take here's my 10 gig circuit, I lease it for a year, and I get a steady revenue, and I move to a pay-per-use model, and I might get more, and I might get less. Okay, we can make the technology available that you can do that, but will people pay enough on that pay-per-use model, especially after we've sort of spoiled them and said, here's a 10 gig, it's your 10 gig for a year, don't worry about it.
Well, we did our cloud pilots in 2009 with IBM and Level 3 media customers that didn't want to build out their data centers in New York City. It was way too expensive. Storage was just causing a problem. So we would cloud burst into an IBM cloud facility. And that did not take off because the cost of the circuits were 70% of the cost of the cloud service. What if we go back to that model again? We go to those same customers and say, we want to do this again with you, but now we'll give you the wavelengths on demand for when you need to cloud burst into that facility. And they know when they need to cloud burst into that facility because they're out of room in their data center. And then we take that to the next step and say, it's not just the IBM Cloud Center, it's this cloud center, that cloud center, and we'll switch into anyone you want. And all of a sudden it becomes a very interesting discussion. And the savings really isn't necessarily in the network, it's in the service, the overall service, end to end.
Yeah.
So, what do we do about this being secure?
Well, I think that, I'm not the layer 3 security expert at level 3, but when we talk about services like this, that is certainly a concern, because anytime that you create an API that allows somebody to interface electronically into the controls of the network, that just raises big concern. And it's not something that you can, even if you just isolate it to, you can alleviate some of that concern by isolating it to a particular layer of the network, or carving off a partition of the network or a separate physical network and say, okay, this is the network we're going to use for that. But it's still, customers have great concerns over that. So we're going to have to come up with the proper controls in terms of not just from from the idea of hacking into the API or managing the interfaces to access it, but work has to be done in terms of the controls around just how customers, how you manage conflicts of demand between different customers, and keep one customer from overriding another customer's bandwidth as they use it in the network.
And that's not only the network, but the cloud facility itself, right?
The whole thing. So I think the big thing here, there's security, there's policy, right? And I love to work with analogies. So the analogy I'm going to use is ATM, but automated teller machines, not asynchronous transfer mode. If you have an ATM, you can go in and deposit money, withdraw money, look at your balances, move things between accounts, but you can't create a new account. Right? So around ATM, self-service is huge, right? It's all about self-service, but it doesn't mean you can create accounts. So there's an implicit policy there that says, this is what you can do and this is what you can't do. And to Paul's point, if you start opening up APIs to your customers, you have to put policy around this. This is what you can do and this is what you can't do. And to your point about, if you grab this bandwidth, somebody else will get hurt. You have to have policies. So there's two different things. There's security and there's policies. And I think the policy question is much harder. The security question is much deeper. So, but opening up the network and giving that kind of access, I'm sure the banks had the same sort of heartburn. What do you mean we're going to let people just go and query their accounts and transfer money and stuff? They got to walk up to a human being to do this. So no, not anymore. So in doing that in the network, I think we have similar sort of heartburn, and we have to get over that in the right way.
When you use SDN and everything, all your flows are monitored from one location. So you can take a look at the topology from the SDN controller, and you can measure those flows. Doesn't that give you the tools to create that policy and to also limit the flows that certain customers can request based on that policy?
So the centralization of SDN is, for me, I get a negative reaction when you talk about centralization. But what's important to me about centralization is we look at the network box by box, and SDN says step away, look at the network as a whole. So to your question, having a central place where all this happens gives me the tools not to create the policy, but to base the policy on. I still have to create what the policy is. Do I allow Paul to have 50 flows or 500 flows, or 50 lambdas or 500 lambdas? Do I, if someone else wants a lambda, which Paul is using today, do I preempt his lambda? So I think by centralizing things, I make it possible to create these policies, but we still have to figure out what the policies are.
Mm-hmm. And the bigger question is who's going to do that work?
The system integrator you talked about.
Exactly. When we look at security, we can do it at different levels, right? You can do it in the server, choose up CPU cycles. You can do it in all your routers. We know what that does. We can set up separate boxes so that a person coming into a cloud facility, if I have 50 customers, I have 50 separate boxes that I have to manage. Yeah. It seems to me that encryption at layer 1 is the best way to address the issue, isn't it? As far as the transport layer.
Well, yeah, I mean, the security at layer, if you're isolating it down to layers, then layer 1 is a good one to start with, because it's, you can't tap it from the internet. You don't have the layer 3 access and ubiquitous access to the internet into it. But even that is still got risk, because, I mean, you still have to guard against the interfaces that are ultimately, at some point, IP interfaces into the control of the network just from a usability standpoint, interface standpoint, and so you have to protect that. And then as you're going into, and then as you start working through the layers and start working the interactions between layers, all of those interfaces, all of those points of connection and communication between there start to, open up the areas for risk. And so it is definitely a multi-layered security model that you've got to think through.
And your first question makes it harder. Do you make this open? Yes, absolutely, you make it open. And when you make it open,
yeah, it's open
security.
to people that are interested in.
So we have to tackle it, but we have to tackle it in an open way.
One thing I will say though is that the things that we don't. There's a lot of things that we don't know, but what we do know is just the general trend that companies, people, humans want to do things more themselves, okay, which is a change from that. That hasn't always been the case. People used to want to interact with another human and have somebody, and that felt like good service. Today, good service is somebody being able to do it themselves on demand and also do it near real time and have it happen as fast as possible. Right. Those two dynamics in terms of the evolving future of customer service is ultimately going to, we got to use that to say these are problems that we have to solve. I mean, we can't just sit around and say, well, I don't know if the economics aren't going to work. I don't know if that. In the end, these are big forces that are whether we individually in our companies cooperate with it or not, are going to progress forward and force evolution in this.
You kind of got to provide a service that matches the workload requirement of the customer.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I think that should be the goal. Now, how do we get there? And the first person to get there is going to be disruptive. Mm-hmm. We've run out of time, so I don't think we have too much. We don't have time for questions because we've run out of time. But I want to thank you for joining us today. I really appreciate it. It was a great discussion.
Okay, thanks.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
PTC'14 is made possible in part by the generosity of the PTC'14 sponsors. Mahalo to each of the PTC'14 Gold sponsors. Thank you for all of your support. During PTC'14, the PTC Secretariat will be located in C Pearl 3 on the 6th floor of the Mid-Pacific Conference Center at the Hilton Hawaiian Village Waikiki Beach Resort. If you need assistance from a member of the Secretariat, please visit C Pearl 3. Your PTC'14 registration includes wireless internet access at the following locations throughout the Hilton Hawaiian Village Waikiki Beach Resort: Mid-Pacific Conference Center, Kalia Conference Center, Tapa Conference Center, Super Pool, Tapa Pool and Bar, and Starbucks.
Hello, I'm Maribel Lopez, the founder of Lopez Research, a market research firm in San Francisco, and we're here today at PTC TV. We're talking with John Sarkis, the VP of Connectivity at Digital Realty. John, your company's made several announcements. You've recently done some work in Singapore, U.S. expansions. Can you tell me a little bit about what's going on in that marketplace and how it's evolving and what your role is in it?
Sure, thank you.
Well, Digital Realty's presence in the Asia-Pac region has provided significant coverage across that entire sector. And what we've done with our ecosystem and our enablement of getting network service providers to our customers, which is the ultimate goal of our ecosystem, we've been able to team up with Bluetel and the Singapore Internet Exchange to get our customers access to those network products and network services revolving around that. In essence, shrinking the very large region, as you can imagine, through within Asia-Pac into a consolidated, easily connected and network robust environment.
Okay, so a more cohesive, flattened but yet expanded market, so you can get into all of APAC.
Well, yeah, I mean, technology makes the world smaller.
Right, absolutely.
And that's the idea of our ecosystem being able to provide customers and service providers the ability to connect together, even across large regions like Asia-Pac.
So tell me about AM6 and the OpenIX.
Well, the Open Internet Exchange initiative has rolled out and gotten quite a bit of steam in North America. Very quickly, the OpenIX is an environment that's open and run by the community itself, which I say the internet community, where they have control over the ability to connect to one another and pass traffic in an open, neutral environment. And that is currently a proven environment within Europe, which now is extended over to the US. And AM6, which is the Amsterdam Internet Exchange, rolled out their initiative in New York and located their actual Open Internet Exchange platform within our facility in New York, enabling now the ability to connect to an open environment in North America, which has never been the case. So this is truly groundbreaking, and it's something great for the industry, and just fantastic to see this expand so quickly.
So the Open Internet Exchange and data centers, tell me a little bit about how you think that changes the data center environment and what the role is for companies like yours and how it's evolving.
Well, with the OpenIX and platforms like OpenIX, it just goes to show you what happens within a data center. Okay. Data centers have become probably the single most important component for technology, where everything happens in a data center.
Right.
So they're secure, they're safe environments, and with information being so critical, you're able to secure and store all your information within the data center, and ideally get it out of the data center. So with OpenIX, just one of the many other initiatives that are happening within our data centers, and the industry is dependent more so on a data center than ever before, which requires companies like myself, Digital Realty, to enhance our data center services, not just the data center portfolio, but the services that happen within the data center.
Makes perfect sense. You're here as a sponsor for the show. Tell me what you expect to get out of the show and why PTC is important to you this year.
Well, with this forum and Digital Realty's evolution from a data center provider to a data center services provider, I want to bring Digital Realty to the forefront within the carrier and network service provider environment. And PTC is the perfect forum for it. We're focused mainly on our Asia-Pac partnerships and initiatives, since this is a very Asia-centric conference. Bringing digital to the forefront is the main goal here today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time and attention today, and I hope you have a great show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
PTC'14 is made possible in part by the generosity of the PTC'14 sponsors. Mahalo to each of the PTC'14 silver sponsors. Thank you for all of your support. Time now for a keynote interview with Steve Sims, Vice President of Solutions and Design and founder of the Behavior Lab at Batchville, about how to win at gamification.
Hello, everybody.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Good to meet you.
And can you guys hear me? Okay. The lay was in the way. We're here today to talk about gamification, and in case you don't remember, we have the live SIFT system. And if you'd like to ask a question during this, I'll be holding the live SIFT system and see what you are looking at. It's livesift.com, and the passcode is PTC'14. Great. So as noted, I'm Maribel Lopez. I'm an industry analyst. I run a market research and strategy consulting firm called Lopez Research. We focus predominantly on mobility, but also the intersection of mobile, big data, and cloud computing. A lot of our clients are fascinated by gamification and how they can use it in their business, both internally to make it more successful, but also to drive engagement with their client base. And I'm going to allow Steve Sims to introduce himself from Badgeville.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Quick question, read of the room. How many people are in like telco and cable infrastructure, that kind of stuff? Raise your hand. How many people are in sales? How many people are in mobile? What else do you guys do? Data centers. Okay. Did I miss one? We'll figure it out. I'm actually a game guy. So I come from electronic arts. So I worked on John Madden football and a bunch of other things there. What's happened really is there's been kind of a change in the world. And the change has to do with how people interact with technology. And gamification is one of those things that's come out of it. And so that's why we're here to talk. Right?
And for those in the room, I mean, gamification is a term that, while some of the concepts have been around for a long time, maybe the term is new to you. So could you define what you mean by gamification?
Sure. Gamification is the application of techniques and psychology used from and learned from video games. Video games have been around for a while now, applied to real-world scenarios and situations.
So tell us a little bit about how gamification came about and how it's different from some of the things we might have heard of before, like leaderboards in sales or things of that nature.
Sure.
Are they different?
Yeah, sure. Fundamentally, people are motivated by a bunch of different things. People are motivated by feeling smart. They're motivated by feeling like they're making progress and they're successful. They're motivated by feeling socially valued. How do I compare to other people, and how does the group feel about me, the company, the team I'm in, what have you? And finally, people are motivated by structure. And what happens is all of these things you see in the world that you think aren't necessarily aspects of gamification actually are. Who used airline miles to come out here? Anybody? Anybody use airline or get airline miles on your flights, right? That's gamification. It's a kind of a poor man's version in loyalty, but it's a version. Does anybody have one of these? You know what this is? Fitbit? Okay, that's gamification too. If you think about the whole quantified self movement and how I measure myself and I got to get those 500 more steps to meet my goal, that's gamification too.
So, as I said, in some ways this isn't a new term, but it sounds like we've got at least 4 different motivational paradigms that we're looking at. And from the perspective of those 4 motivational paradigms, we have a cross-section of people in the room, obviously. How do you think this applies to telecom and to service provider industry in general?
Sure. So telco, there's actually a lot of use cases that are possible, and actually we've deployed a couple. The first is you can do support center. So if you think about people who go in to complain about their phone or they want to ask questions, if you can answer that on the website versus having them talk to a live person, you're saving money for the telco. And that's actually, we have a deployment up at Kudu Mobile, which is TELUS up in Canada with that. Other things are call centers. If you think about those people, how are they motivated? Whether you realize it or not, in contact centers, they're actually gamified already, although it may be very, very crude. They'll have leaderboards, who's the employee of the week or the call center person of the month. Those things can all be automated such that people are incentivized to perform better but have a happier experience at work.
We have a lot of questions coming in from the audience.
I got a couple more. I didn't think about telco. Telco, there's also things like sales management and other things. A quick shout out, we have a partnership with whoever is familiar with Oracle, and we do a lot of stuff that has overlap with telco. And everything from billing and revenue management to sales and CRM. So if you're an Oracle house or an Oracle shop, you can contact your people, and our stuff is actually built into some of their stuff.
Okay, I'm going to ask you the hardest question on this because I think everybody has this question in some way, shape, or form, and that's how do you measure ROI for gamification? And I think this is critical for any thing you do, but gamification is one that people have been interested in.
Yeah, I think for ROI, there's a bunch of ways you can measure this. Fundamentally, I'll divide it down into two things. You're either making money or you're saving money. In the case of some of our deployments out in the consumer world, it's conversions to shopping cart, it's moving people down that acquisition funnel, things like that. In the case of the support thing that I mentioned earlier, it's about how many calls they deflect, because they know how much it costs per call. And if they can reduce that, then that's a clear ROI victory of cost savings. For sales performance, that's obviously what are the increases in numbers. There is one other aspect of ROI sometimes they talk about, which is actually engagement, which is how many activities do people engage with. And it turns out that in a lot of your ecosystems of how your customers, your consumers, your employees work, there's kind of a long tail distribution. How many activities, how many times a week they come in, how often they come in, what's that lifetime value? And so driving that up is also a measure of a way you can translate to ROI.
Yep, and I thought this one was kind of funny, but it actually is quite pertinent, is using a system like LiveSift gamifying the audience.
It's interesting. I'm new to LiveSift now. I think that if we were to reward and crowdsource the answers, if you guys all had phones, and you could vote on whose question is the best or which answer was the best if we were in a panel, that may be a way of gamifying it. As it is now, the aspects that may be thought of as gamification have to do with like social proof. Does everybody know what social proof is? Okay, it's her birthday over there. Let's all clap. Can we all clap for a second? Anybody? Come on. All right. Whoever clapped, you're a victim of social proof. It's because you have no idea why you're clapping. I mean, I told you it was her birthday. It's not her birthday. But the point is, when somebody in a meeting starts clapping, yay, Joe did something or Sal did something, we all start clapping. Social proof is the norm that everybody goes to feel like they're fitting along. So to that case, LiveSift, if it were broadcast and showing what everybody else was doing, so you asked a question because everybody else was asking a question, that would be an aspect of a type of mechanic you would see in gamification or behavior management.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think that you're getting to something that I think is a real critical element of gamification, and that is, what is engagement? And is it enough to just, say, okay, I've asked it. So what LiveSift is trying to do is drive an element of engagement, and then I think gamification is trying to elicit a certain set of behaviors around that.
Yeah, I think
would that be how you characterize it?
Yeah, I think gamification in some ways is an accelerator. So if you think about it, you can reward, in the typical, everybody play Mario? Everybody know Mario? You do stuff, or how about Candy Crush? I'm a Candy Crush addict. Anybody else? No? Nobody? No Candy Crush? But, you do these things, and then points lead to level, points lead to stuff, and stuff leads to, actions lead to points lead to levels. There's a different kind of thing, those are called game mechanics, but there are types of mechanics like social mechanics, which are these things like, on Facebook, find and follow, right, or activity streams for content discovery. And whether you realize it or not, all of those kind of techniques are digital techniques that are psychologically moving you based on these different principles.
Yeah, or LinkedIn, you're
LinkedIn.
90% complete in your profile.
Absolutely. So we talked about those 4 things that motivate you in terms of structure and progress. That's exactly what the LinkedIn progress bar is. If anybody ever looks at the game I always play on LinkedIn, is I'm always looking at who looked at me. and I hate this thing where it says anonymous, and then someone else looked at me. And the reason for that is that's actually another psychological mechanic. The itch they're trying to scratch is who's looking at me, and I may be missing out on a business opportunity or a social opportunity, what have you, if I don't go look at it. Right. They're also using it as a way to try to upsell you to LinkedIn Premium. It's a pretty effective thing.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's another example of these kind of techniques.
Okay. The display.
There we go. This is awesome. Great questions.
So what types of mobile technologies can be employed to gaming my workspace? Or just maybe how can mobile be employed to gaming my workspace?
Yeah, there's a lot of different stuff. So I've seen everything from, leaderboards with combines of tablets plus mobile plus leaderboards for things that are going on. I've seen things where people are using to check where everybody else is, to upvote, downvote. It's kind of unlimited. In this new world where everything is going all connected all the time, If you think from our research, we see 3 kind of big trends. One is the trend of personalization, where everything has to be, it's about making everything about me for everyone. I like that.
I like
the
that.
second is always connected and always on. And I can't even remember the third one at this point, so I maybe call it jet lag. But the point is that mobile is a key point, and it's a key touch point. I've seen it on the floor of retailers. I've seen it on tablet in live events. I've seen it in the office and every day. It's why all of the major providers of things that we work with have mobile apps. And
I love this. I don't even know if you need a moderator if you just have somebody that can feed questions like this, but this is great.
No.
Can gamification do anything for carriers who are losing engagement with subscribers to over-the-top services?
I'm sorry for being completely naive. Over the top, Joe, help me. What is over the top?
Services like Google that are sitting on top.
Oh, like Skype and stuff? Yeah. So the interesting thing is, that's actually kind of what we're doing in some ways with Oracle. Understanding your user, churn has to do with stickiness, the stopping of churn. So what ends up happening is, I'm going to talk a little junior psychology 101 for anybody. I hope that's okay. Basically what happens is to create a habit, people have to interact frequently with something. The more frequently you interact, the better chance you have of creating a habit. If you can't do that, or at the beginning before there is a habit, you have to show utility. What is the value of what I'm doing and why would I want to do this? Yeah. And so what ends up happening is the people in those over-the-top services, they've already created habits, so it's hard to pull people out of that. So it's basically the carriers have to figure out what are the patterns of usage and what are the things that will create stickiness to leave. Even things like, this is old, but Yahoo Mail. Gmail's kind of killed Yahoo in a lot of ways, right? Mm-hmm. But I still have my Yahoo homepage because it's configured exactly the way I like it. And so they've managed to create stickiness. One model, it's not my model, but one model that I've seen, basically your trigger leads to an action, which leads to a variable reward or some kind of emotional payoff and an investment. And if you put investment into whatever service you're having, you have a chance, it's Nir Eyal who did this, by the way, you have a chance of keeping that habit loop going. So the thing is, for the OTT answer, the carriers, it's about providing value and creating sticky solutions. T-Mobile did this a long, long time ago with Friends and Family. Do you remember Friends and Family? The 5-person at the time, based on billing structures and stuff. The Friends and Family created a stickiness that people weren't able to get out of. It was pretty effective while it was running.
This one's interesting. Can gamifying be taken too far?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So the most important thing, if you guys want to do this for your own enterprises, B2B, by the way, we do B2B as well as B2C. There's some interesting use cases. Is you have to be transparent with who you're working with. You have to understand the culture. I think I wrote something about this on my blog, but you have to understand the laws and legalities of where you are. How a call center in the Philippines works is completely different than how a call center in India would work, or in Eastern Europe. So rewarding the right way, being transparent. The other thing is, I wouldn't say it's necessarily taken too far. What I would say is misapplied. When gamification goes bad, it's usually because the paradigm and the design and the product isn't really understood, and what you're throwing at it isn't the right solution. I'll give you an example. Everybody know Biggest Loser? Biggest Loser, everybody familiar with that? Weight loss show? Okay. When you're at the beginning of that show, having me get on the scale against you is a really bad idea. I'm very sensitive, I'm very heavy, I'm heavy now, and I'm sensitive about it. But as the show progresses, and they do better, and that's why their team competitions work really well at the beginning, blue team, gray team. As they get further down and they've lost enough weight, they're so proud of themselves, they're running through the poster of themselves, they're running through the holograms, and that's when it's okay. So again, most of the time it's about context and application than taking too far.
This leads me to maybe a clarification point about gamification. So one of the things that I think might be an issue, and I'm interested in your opinion on this, is people might set up a gamification strategy, but then what? Is it something that constantly has to evolve?
Yeah, so our view on this is gamification is like a garden. And if you have a garden, you have to tend it. and you have to care. And so the reason gamification is here is because of the rise of analytics and data and social, like in Facebook and Zynga and things like that. We try something, we look how the crowd reacts, and then we iterate constantly. Any of these programs need to be iterated constantly because your people change, they come in and out, they get more mature. And so to understand what's going on in your community, this is another tool or a touch point to help you effectively engage with your users, be they customers or employees, what have you.
How can games be applied to designing team projects or accomplishing critical tasks?
So gamification is slightly different. So the one thing we didn't talk about is the span, and I can talk to you afterwards because I'm probably running out of time, but you have games over here, then you have serious games, which are simulations, and then gamification is really about taking those things and applying the methodologies to help people do more things effectively. Isolating the critical tasks, social collaboration, rewarding good ideas in a social setting are all ways that you could get more efficiency in critical tasks. We've seen it used also in like project management, project estimation. I mean, a bunch of things, QA, a bunch of things that you would never think that it would be used for, it is.
Can I just get a time check? Because I have 2 different times. Okay, thank you. So we have time for one more question, and I think I'll ask that question.
Sure.
If you're thinking about designing a gamification strategy, I know that everybody's different, but is there a certain place that somebody should start? Or at least what are the 3 aspects of a gamification strategy they should be thinking about?
Well, there's a bunch of primers out there you can read. A lot of people have books. I should probably write one myself. But I think there's the things I'd probably take into things is make sure you understand your users before you implement anything. User journeys are important. People are human. They're predictable in weird ways, but they're predictable. The other thing is I'd figure out what my touch points are. Where am I deploying this and kind of what is my long-term strategy? You're telling a story to your employees or to your customers, what have you, of personal or professional growth. And, put yourself in their shoes. How do I see myself over those terms? And from there, you'll be able to extract from that narrative, narrative plus touch points plus these different things and use cases and objectives will kind of lead you to the right design and the right application, which you can measure and tune over time.
So is there maybe a difference in strategy if you're doing short-term gamification versus longer-term gamification?
The problem with some short gamification also is that you always get a spike from novelty. Novelty will always give you a spike even if it's poorly designed. So the key is to actually program it on a number of different levels. I'll leave you with this one. Everybody knows, this is satellite out here, but everybody knows Showtime, HBO, all that kind of thing, whatever your equivalents are. Okay, when Homeland is done, what's your next show? If you don't have another show, they're going to leave. That's why, there's Game of Thrones, or there's Nurse Jackie, and then there's Dexter, and then there's Homeland. There's show after show after show. Our most successful deployments are with people who understand that. So for instance, do you guys know MTV? We power MTV in Canada. They're constantly running programming, figuring out, okay, this month it's tickets to the VMAs. Right. Next time it's a sponsorship run for Gossip Girl, or it's Justin Bieber gives you a tweet out or something, a shout out or something like that. And so understanding your audience, how they interact, the cadence, and programming this thing, like a gardener tending his garden, is the way to go.
Wonderful. Steve, thank you so much for your time. Let's round of applause for Steve.
Round of applause for you.
And I think we leave you to lunch now. Thank you.
Thanks.
PTC'14 is made possible in part by the generosity of the PTC'14 sponsors. Mahalo to each of the PTC'14 bronze sponsors. Thank you for all of your support.
I hope you have enjoyed your time in Honolulu at PTC'14. Remember, PTC's mission extends well beyond our conferences. Learn more about our year-round activities, watch the full PTC TV programs, or individual keynote addresses and more at ptc.org. Once again, mahalo for joining us this year. I look forward to seeing you next year at PTC'15 from January 18th to the 21st. Ahui ho!
PTC TV is brought to you by PTC'14 Platinum sponsor Equinix. Mahalo Equinix. Thank you for sponsoring PTC TV.